I'm really excited to talk about transversal skills. This is the new buzzword in DCU. You'll have to forgive me, I missed the first hour of our session today, so hopefully there hasn't been too much coverage of it, but I'm really excited to talk about a new kind of updated module, which was initially a kind of a classic, if you like, critical thinking and an academic skills module, which we've kind of revamped for the purposes of the DCU Futures framework. So I just thought I'd give a brief overview of this context. Why there's this obsession now with so-called soft skills, transversal skills, and what that actually means when it comes to teaching and learning. And I'll use this module as a case example for that. And I suppose three key reflections with respect to building in transversal skills into a module like this. So just a brief overview on what DCU Futures is. It has very kind of direct language as regards, a radical reimagination of the university curriculum, enhancing our innovation and agility for future skills needs. So this kind of key strategy is, if you like, future-proofing student skills across what are likely to be multiple careers in the workplace. What does it actually mean when it comes to our day-to-day? It essentially means transforming what we thought was gospel approaches to teaching and learning. So out with the kind of hierarchical model of the lecturer leading and it being more of a collaborative space, as our dean of teaching and learning said, be bold with our curriculum, and thinking about the various kind of new competencies, digital literacies and various transferable skills that students will need, particularly when we think about the future of work being most likely to be some form of a hybrid model. And of course, with that comes the need for industry partnership as well, which DCU has a very strong record in anyway. So from that, we have a really exciting batch of new programs, and the one that this module was nested in is the BSc there in psychology and disruptive technologies. I suppose the DCU Futures approach as it relates to critical thinking skills more generally, and the types of assessment and learning approaches that we would use is best summarized in this chart here. And I suppose when we think about critical thinking and the types of activities that tend to work, it's often challenge-based and problem-based approaches. So that was the starting point for this module. As I said, it was formerly a critical thinking and academic skills module, a pure one, which would simply be looking at the likes of how we define critical thinking, what we mean by reasoning and argumentation, classic examples of logical fallacies and biases, for example, in our writing, in our thinking, and from that, kind of your hierarchy of evidence and different means of approaching knowledge generation. I was a bit of a cynic at the beginning, thinking that, is that just a bit boring? Our students want something, they want to see that in action rather than being given the thinking roadmap first and then getting the action later. So what was really exciting about this module is thinking about how can we build in more formalized collaboration skills? How can we relate this to industry? So the revamp module simply has those types of skills in the title. We have a module of just under 70 students, and I'll walk you through kind of three key reflections on this now. Here's just a brief snapshot of some of the content in the updated module. The core tenets of critical thinking are still there as they would have to be. Biases in the real world drew on actual case studies of behavioral science in industry. Enterprise and design skills, I'll talk a bit now in a sec, was an integral part about building in the bridge between industry and academia as it relates to using your critical thinking wherever you are in your career to actually produce something. And knowledge generation, synthesis and communication was something that was really key in terms of bridging, I suppose, research to practice gaps. And then finally, persuasion and consulting skills was thinking about even if you don't have mastery of evidence, you can still be able to sell yourself and sell your ideas. The whole world of consulting and the types of skills that are at play there were of particular interest to students. The first kind of point of reflection relates to the assessment, and I know a lot of attendees today have mentioned kind of different ways of creatively using their assessments to empower students, and the e-portfolio was one method that worked quite well. In this module, I had three components to this portfolio. The first of which was a critical reflection of their own development throughout this module. So could they actually evidence how their thinking evolved? The second piece was an external interaction with industry and or a case study. And then the third part was completion of an industry recognized LinkedIn Learning course. So DCU has signed a 3-year contract with LinkedIn Learning on a range of kind of pre-accredited courses. Often they're to do with project management, to do with agile approaches. All of which would speak to the more formal recognition of collaboration skills. So the idea would be that students would come out with a portfolio of their own thinking and an actual accredited course that they could showcase into the future. We have a new ebook that our colleague Lisa Donaldson has just compiled. So if anyone's interested in how the e-portfolio works across modules, you may be able to check that out. The second approach is to do with kind of challenge-based or maybe problem-based approaches. If anyone, I see from some of the attendees, someone else might have done the DCU virtual escape rooms back in what feels like years ago, but probably last August, I think. A lot of the actual doing of this module involved students getting up and having to participate and collaborate with others with randomized small groups. And this was sometimes online, this was sometimes offline. So you can think of the likes of virtual escape rooms, panel discussions with external guests, design sprints, hackathons, all of these things where they were using core critical thinking skills to produce some particular output. What really worked well here was the various kind of approaches that are out there in relation to design thinking. Because it's so non-hierarchical, but yet used across the board, and of interest to kind of policymakers and senior management, it's just really transferable to any kind of problem statement. So this worked really, really well. And those would be the 3 resources that I would nudge people towards if you're thinking of perhaps building that into your own modules. They're just very simplified and open access resources that can really produce some interesting outputs, which include some of these things. Students by the end of the module had fascinating identities in their groups as it related to different business ideas and different solutions for big societal problems. Psychology, referring to, for example, the high prevalence of spiking of drinks, and students were building in apps to try and take the prevalence data of that problem with the view to future-proofing potential victims. Classroom Comrades was students working on how to rebuild a DCU classroom. They pitched all of these ideas to our head of school, and the winning team got some nice Just Eat vouchers as well. But the whole exercise was really, really enjoyable from a student perspective, and it allowed them to actually realize what critical thinking skills means in action. Basically, they weren't building anything as a core output; rather, they were evidencing how they were thinking and then selling that. So, I suppose reflecting the kind of general content of the overall module. And just I end on this third reflection, which is, I suppose, given where DCU Futures is at, and thinking about the more formal.
1 minute, Darragh.
Thank you. And just thinking about the more formal approach of building in transversal skills. It's still an open question as to what's the optimal way of actually defining and measuring these transversal skills. And I think the key takeaway from this module was the format and the types of activities that we do are probably the most important thing. And for me, the hackathon and a design approach what's the best way of getting something that can be scrutinized, not just by academics, but also by industry. And I'm very curious about maybe different technologies that could give, if you like, a more real-time monitoring of how students are building different transversal skills. It's not just collaboration. There's a whole range of different key skills that can be used. And of course, a really exciting thing is where we can link this to the real world. So students being able to see external guests and industry taking an interest in them at a really early stage is actually quite exciting for them. And I think thanks to all my colleagues in DCU, particularly DCU Studio and DLDU, for all their amazing work during the summer getting this content ready. So thank you for listening.